What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of MUT Tips. I'm your host, Sean Taylor from the Made Up Theater. Before we jump in, make sure to like the video down below, comment with somebody you'd like addressed in a future video, and as always, subscribe on YouTube to be informed of upcoming videos and live streams. Ring that bell. But let's jump into today's topic. What are your go-tos in improv? Go-tos are characters or choices or things that we default to on stage because they come natural to us, and we're good at them. They're not crutches that we use to get through a performance. No, they're like comfortable sneakers. We put them on, we feel good, they're easy to walk in. And yeah, it all comes down to just feeling that comfort and sometimes an uncomfortable situation of being on stage in front of people. But the problem with having go-tos and using them too much is that we hinder our ability to discover new things outside of our comfort zone. First things first, in order to step out of your comfort zone, first you need to define the comfort zone, Write down on a pen and paper on your laptop just some characters that you go to often. And we'll get into some other ways you could do that, but just go with your gut, off the top of your head, what are some characters that you default to? I myself might write an eccentric villain or a grizzled old man. What are just some instant thoughts that come to you right now? Let me help you out a little bit. So write down some reactions to some questions I'm gonna ask you, and we can figure out characters, not necessarily that you go to often, but just characters that you feel comfortable with, okay? Let's start first with status. I cover status in episode 54 of MUT Tips if you want to check that out. But do you generally do low status characters, high status characters, or even in the middle? Write that down. Next is physicality. Are you more of a physical improviser where, all your characters have very specific walks or movements? Maybe you interact with the environment a lot. Or would you consider yourself more stationary, you find yourself sitting or standing in scenes and the emphasis is more on the dialogue that your character brings. Next is the most common, it's self. Do you find yourself playing yourself on stage where you're not changing anything for the most part? And it's like a heightened version of yourself. You're playing 90, 95% close to yourself and the other 10 or 5%. You might make those choices that you wouldn't do in real life. You might on stage in an improvised scene rob a bank, but in real life you probably wouldn't, right? Because there's consequences. Or do you find yourself playing a drastically different version where it's just a character that is very outside of yourself, that if you brought friends and family to watch you in a show and they see you doing these characters, they'd be like, whoa, that's you? Next is emotions. Do you find yourself playing very emotional characters? Or would you say that your characters are more subdued when it comes to emotion? Or very opposite, maybe you're not emotional at all and more of it comes down to intellect or wit. Maybe you're a very dry improviser. And if you do use emotions, what emotion do you default to the most? A lot of people usually default to some type of anger, from some level of 1 to 10, 1 being subtle, 10 being extreme. Because, anger does sometimes equal comedy. A lot of people do like seeing people reach a breaking point on stage, and a lot of sitcoms have this as well. But what about you? Do you default to anger? Do you default to happiness, joy, or sadness, or, fear, paranoia? Write down your more common emotions that you do go to. Next up is alignment. Taken from Dungeons and Dragons, are you the hero in an improv scene? Are you the villain? I know a lot of people generally don't like playing bad characters on stage because it's very outside of themselves. I also know people like myself who are very comfortable with that to the point where villains can be a go-to for me. What's yours? And a few more for you. What about age? Do you play younger characters like children or teenagers? Or do you sometimes go way beyond that and go to 70-year-olds or 80-year-olds? Or somewhere in the middle age, which sometimes is playing close to ourselves? What age do you generally go to? Next is gender. Do you generally find yourself playing, your own gender on stage? Or do you experiment with the opposite sex? The thing with this is we want to play them true and respectful. I do oftentimes see improvisers when they play the opposite sex, they're almost doing a caricature. So men playing women will just have a I'm a Mickey Mouse voice, oh, and it's that's not how women talk at all. And opposite, women might play men, it's just big beef heads, with a really deep voice. And those can be fun caricatures, but at a point, it's almost like we're denying ourselves the capability of truly investing in an interesting, in-depth character of the opposite sex. So what do you do? Next is activity, which is similar to physicality, but think about it this way. Imagine a scene has just peaked and you gotta go edit it. And you edit it and you're like, oh my gosh, I edited a scene, but I don't know what to do right now. And usually I tell people we'll start with an activity. What is an activity that sometimes you default to when you have no idea? There's no suggestion or inspiration in your head. You just do it spontaneously. You know, some people will like start driving in a car or typing in a laptop or writing in a notebook. You know, there's a lot of different activities. Like I myself will just start digging to the point where like, you know, my students will laugh at me on stage if they see me start to dig because I do reference it a lot. That's a go-to for mine. What is a go-to for you? Those are just a few questions to help you self-analyze yourself as an improviser. And if you struggle with it, you can always ask for help. I recommend asking a teacher, someone in that position who's seen you improvise a lot and also has the authority to kind of give you that feedback. You can ask a friend who you improvise with a lot, but keep it positive. Don't, you know, give notes back and forth to each other. Just say, hey, what are some characters that you think I do well, you know? Because they're go-tos, they're good characters. So figure that out from an outside perspective if you need. But now it's like, hey, how do I not do go-tos? Well, first of all, you're going to still do your go-tos, okay? Don't worry about it. It's not a bad thing, especially in shows. You'll almost certainly do go-tos in show because the stakes are higher. You just have to react in the moment, and the first thing out of your pocket is a go-to character or choice. Oh well, it's not a big deal. But take advantage in workshops and classes to try to do different stuff, you know? And it doesn't have to be the extreme. Take one of your go-tos and simply tweak it. Don't make a huge change to it. Just like add a different detail to it or a detail that is not present. So for example, if your go-to of an activity is driving a car, well, what type of car is it? Is it a convertible? Well, that's gonna make you improvise differently, right? Like your hair's kind of blowing in the wind, you might have sunglasses now, and now you have more information because you've given specific detail to your go-to action that maybe you do sometimes. Or maybe it's a more small, compact car where you feel uncomfortable in it. That's a different choice too that still stays just a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Pretty much all of your go-tos can be tweaked in some way, and it will allow you to discover new characters and just new things about what you can do. And always be specific with your go-tos. So for example, if you find yourself playing old people, how old? Assign a number to it. Are they like 80-year-olds, 70-year-olds? If they're 70-year-olds, maybe try to play a 60-year-old, you know? You don't have to go all the way to the opposite and just play like a 5-year-old all of a sudden. You can, obviously, but tweak what you know. Tweak what you can do well and see if you can discover a different facet of your go-tos. In order to get yourself out of your comfort zone, you do need to try. Try and fail. Don't worry about it being successful all the time. The success is that you actually tried. And it could be on stage, but it could also be off stage. You know, think about some stuff that you maybe haven't done that you should do and just try it out because that gets you out of your comfort zone, and that's where art and discovery takes place. You ever done karaoke before? Maybe try it out. Get out of your comfort zone, and you can take that experience and put it on the stage as well. And that concludes this episode of MUT Tips, everybody. Thanks so much for checking it out. Again, if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time for another episode of MUT Tips. Bye!